My name is Nancy Dillette, and I'm an academic associate at Arizona State University and an oral historian. And today is Tuesday, November 3rd, 2009, and I'm continuing to interview life members of the Arizona City County Management Association for an oral history project. And what we're doing is documenting the history of life members in order to share the values and principles of the people who have actually participated in that form of government here in Maricopa County, or actually across Arizona. Today we're interviewing Stephen Cleveland, who served a good year for, I think, 24 years, 18 as city manager, before his so-called retirement in 2007. Following that, he served as a consultant for several Arizona towns as deputy city manager in Glendale, and currently is interim Buckeye town manager?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
And this is interview number 18, and Amanda Soros is videotaping the interview for us today. So we're going to start back with the beginning of your story and tell us where and when you were born.
Where I was born? I was born in state of Oregon, Grants Pass, which is in southern part of the state. I spent most of my young life in a town just north of that called Glendale. Glendale, Oregon, a small community, about 1,000 people, a community, high school of 150 kids, students in 4 grades. So much of my youth was spent growing up with my dad and family. We lived 9 miles out of town, so everything we did, you needed a vehicle, you needed somebody to take you there. It was a little difficult with bicycles because the only road was US 99, which became Interstate 5. So it was difficult to ride back and forth because of the narrow 2-lane road conditions. But our parents were always in a position of helping us go to programs, to services, to be involved in sports, including baseball, recreational, Little League, and Babe Ruth. And then in high school, or grade school, moved into basketball, and into high school was basketball, baseball, track. Never got into wrestling, and also football.
Are you watching the World Series?
Not as much as I used to. I used to be a big Yankee fan, and then lost interest after George Steinbrenner bought out the team, and then bought out World Series by buying all the good players. But good businessman.
Being a Phillies fan, I am watching this week.
Yeah.
And what was the year you were born?
1950.
And were your parents in any way involved in any kind of public service in Glendale, Oregon?
My mom was a school librarian aide, and then later became a school board member. My dad was not involved in that. My background, my family was largely in lumber and woods, mill operations and things like that. My dad became the scoutmaster. He had 5 boys, so he had almost an instant scout troop, and grew that to about 15 people. And a lot of my values come from my folks and growing up, in terms of how they committed to making sure that we could go to every program we ever wanted to go to, making sure that we had access to different experiences, including driving all the way to Seattle to the World's Fair, and then in Boy Scouts being able to have an opportunity to go to Valley Forge and the National Jamboree back in 1964. So a lot of those kinds of experiences, and always encouraging us to excel, enabled us to get involved in a lot of clubs that then opened up the door for leadership, and oftentimes was either an officer in the club, the editor of the newspaper for the school, editor of the yearbook, being on the staff, and then moving into the editor positions. So being in a position of leaving the organization as a valedictorian and being able to move on to a university. But even in the sports, we got to do things such as being on teams, and in most instances playing both sides in football, because there was only 22 players. It made it interesting to when 11 of them were seniors in my senior year. 11 of us, and we played both ways. And so you also learned on how to share and how to work with each other, and team was a big part of all the things that we did with Boy Scouts, with the sports and the programs, and then all of our values of growing up in a small community, helping other people, helping to through the church programs and things, to keep in mind our roots. My grandparents were Southern Baptists. We ended up, a church was built a quarter-mile away from our house. We helped in constructing that when I was a young kid. And a general community missionary type of program, a non-denominational, missions-driven church that we always went to school to. So we were always involved in family activities, and our parents and our grandparents and everybody was within 3 miles of where we lived, and it was your nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. So it was not.
What was the birth order for your 5?
I'm number 1.
Siblings?
The oldest of 5 boys in 7 years. So Mom was busy and gave up after the 5th one, decided it was time not to try for a girl, I guess.
So talk to us about your decision to go to the University of Oregon and get involved in public administration.
That was in a large part driven by scholarships and opportunities. Partly being fortunate enough to be valedictorian opened up some doors for scholarships, a state scholarship for tuition. There was an opportunity, and I've always been a history buff, and my grandparents and my uncles and others were able to help provide historic reference to our ancestry. So there was a Joseph Kinman Star Award that I applied for, and that was a significant portion of my tuition and board that ended up tipping going to the University of Oregon, going from 150 students to a 14,000 student campus. Partly a shock, but also really opened up a lot of opportunities probably would not have had if I'd gone to Southern Oregon or some of the other smaller campuses. During the course of deciding what I wanted to be, history, I started out in as want to be a history teacher type of thing. My first year, I determined that was not the best thing for me, and I told my folks, I'm sorry I'm disappointing you, and they quite frankly told me I would have been a lousy teacher because I was too much of a perfectionist. Secondly, I didn't enjoy the Russian language that I was being taught in high school enough to pursue that past one semester in college. So looking around, I ran across a new program concept called Community Service Public Affairs at the University of Oregon. It was several years old. Many of the professors were federal employees in the John F. Kennedy administration that were there sharing federalism. They were there sharing government opportunities, and a number of those opportunities including intern programs with the Eugene city manager and others. And teachers that thought outside the box and were always coming up with creative ways of teaching beyond memorize all these things in the book. I do not like memorization, but I always did well in memorization, but especially in the research category. It only took me 6 classes to get through all the university requirements. Or I should say I took 6 different sets of research and statistics, and the only thing I learned out of all of that was that you should remember only where it is in the book, what theorem to use, but do not memorize the methodology of how to apply it. Go get the book and then follow the book. So learn the recipe, learn that it's in a recipe, and you go find the recipe in the book. The community service public affairs had a minor in public administration, and that was my focus as I went through the school. In my last year of school, my last semester was a requirement to do an internship. That internship led me to the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, and that's Willamette, W-I-L-L-A-M-E-T-T-E. Most people call it Willamette. But at Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, it is the equivalent of MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments here. And during the 3-month period I was there, I had an opportunity to work in various facets of government planning. It was the solid waste planning, where to site a landfill. It was about transportation planning in terms of infrastructure requirements for roads and what have you, criminal justice and social service programming, youth programs, a lot of that driven by the omnibus bill, Nixon's war on crime that would be 1972. And during the course of that, I got to participate in visiting various aspects of government, visiting the programming, the planning side, and that opened the door to one project I worked on, which was a criminal justice information system, computerization of law enforcement, courts, jail, juvenile, all the component parts of the criminal justice system. At the end of that 3-month period of time, they applied for a second extension of the grant. They were funded. They asked me if I wanted to stay working. I said, sure. So I got a full-time job as of July 1 and continued there for 8.5 years. And during that period of time, we did law enforcement planning, we did grants administration, budgeting, writing grants from scratch, helping communities that were as small as 1,000 people up to 90,000 people, which was Salem, Oregon, which was the principal place that we were in, along with 3 counties. So geographically, we had very similar mix to what is in MAG today, except for the 3-county element. We had about 25 to 30 cities. There were a couple of Indian reservations that were not, or Indian tribes that were not participants in that process. But it was the state capital, it was the influences of legislation, it was a place where you got to participate with all the different aspects of government. In the course of that time, the COG, the Council of Governments, was the planning agency for many of the communities. So it actually did the transportation planning, it did the land use planning for communities. The planners worked from Council of Governments and went out and actually helped them do their land use decisions. Another aspect of that period of time was the advent of the Land Conservation and Development Commission, which is the LCDC, which became the forerunner for the legislation that created urban growth boundaries in the state of Oregon. Very much influenced by Tom McCall, who was the governor that brought recycling and environmental issues and preservation of open space into Oregon. So all of these things are elements of those influences. As they say, who you are is what you learned, and how those pieces begin to affect you in terms of your thinking. And it also can influence you in terms of how you think differently, because the University of Oregon was quite liberal by comparison to Oregon State, which basically was more engineering and the science side of the program that they were known for. Where do I pause?
Let me just ask you one follow-up question to that, and that is, in this position, as an intern and then working there in these 8 years, I assume you're exposed to many city managers in these 25 to 30 communities?
Many of those communities had, the larger communities had city managers. The smaller communities had typically the town clerk, administrative element. Because you're a community of less than 5,000 people, you typically did not have a true manager. The managers oftentimes were members of the governing technical advisory committee, or the parties that recommended to the policymakers certain programs and activities. We also had the police chiefs and the technical side for criminal justice. We had another committee that was related to the hospitals, and we did health planning for them, and that group then provided the advice on writing of the health plans that then were forwarded up to the council policymakers of the regional council, and they were adopted at that level. So the answer, yes, we did have a number of managers, and of those managers, several of them at various times provided encouragement, and they also helped you begin to understand how their budgets worked and how our grant programs fit into their being able to further their efforts. We also had certain, I would call, enlightened individuals beyond my parents that understood how important it was to give as much as you get, or you get more by giving. One example would be the police chief in Salem, Oregon, who could have taken 100% of all the monies for that was coming from the federal dollars for police communications, and said, it's not going to do any of us any good if I take all the money and outfit all of my police officers with radios if none of the other police departments can talk to us. So he gave up a portion of his allocation so that a police officer in a smaller community not only got a radio, but also got a car and also got a gun. I mean, that was how basic it was in terms of these individuals needing resources. And he felt like if all of law enforcement had certain elements, certain resources, then they would be that much better off as law enforcement as a whole, serving 3 counties that would almost be 2/3 the size of Maricopa County. So that was another one of those influences of how you need to share and you can get more back from that. They also were into crime prevention, into law enforcement officers going into the schools, what we would today call community or school resource officers. Back then they called them officer friendly. They also had programming that involved the juvenile departments and the the statewide council on youth programs that was youth in the law training. So education, the police officers could go into the schools and as part of their officer friendly program also teach classes on driving, on drugs, on various things that if you do it today, this is the impact on your career as an adult. You're not going to be able to necessarily get your driver's license if you get caught doing some of these things. And what does it mean in terms of your education? What does it mean in terms of your employment long term? So it was this facet of all the elements of what a person has to have in order to be successful in the community. All of these things were part of that 8.5 years. And the cross-disciplinary planning that went on between the transportation side and the police side and the courts, and then the implementation of the regional information system for criminal justice agencies, which then began to share data between all the law enforcement agencies so they had a better shot at getting arrests of individuals and clearing cases in multiple departments. So in the course of time, that 8.5 years went from a researcher to ultimately being the sections administrator of about 12 staff. We put in place 911 through our planning effort and implementation. We put in place the criminal justice information system for computers, a jail services program that actually modeled after Maricopa County's program of release on recognizance. We brought that program into Oregon and got legislation to support that, got funding for alternatives to incarceration, and we did a lot of legislative activity as well. So that required us to work with a lot of different people to be successful in that. On the youth planning side, we had youth mental health, alcohol, and drug programs. So we got involved with the social service side of the programming and the hospitals and that aspect. So in our planning functions, we were able to work with almost every aspect of government, every aspect of nonprofits, every aspect of the community, education included, to affect the community well-being and community excellence.
Well, did you imagine yourself staying in Oregon? Did you picture moving into other positions then, there, or?
Well, at that particular time,
you elsewhere?
At that particular time, no. But there was a point in the process where the planning side, we tried to merge planning with a criminal justice information system to create a statistical research base. That went a little bit awry because I got out in front of the policymakers, my administrator, who didn't exactly like the strategy, and so eventually it made no sense to stay there in the organization. So what I did is I went to work for the Regional Automated Information Network for 3 years and took that program and knowledge and efforts, and I was assigned back to Medford Grants Pass area where I grew up, and I worked for 11 agencies and helped them implement the criminal justice information system in the court, in the juvenile department, in the jail, and the sheriff's office, as well as the police department. Taking all that information and helping them automate their systems, share their information, and use the statistical database for purposes of better management.
Mm-hmm. So these are some of the early statistical management
yes.
systems and computerized
yes.
systems that you were working with then.
Right, and yes, to the extent that we had a software program called Randio, which was Randy, the programmer, wrote the software, and then when he left the organization, nobody knew how to fix it. So, you know, but those were in very early stages of a lot of the use of computers and technology to get anywhere. and to be able to provide statistical information to a police chief to say, you know, most of your police officers are only doing all their citations 1 or 2 days of the month to meet quotas. They never had a quota system, but essentially that influenced their performance. And to be able to show them statistically that all of it was happening on the last 3 days of the month. So what were they doing the previous 27 days of that month? So how do you actually deploy your people? Where is the crime happening? So you have cars going in the right place, those types of things. So many of the planning elements and the working experiences that I had during that next 11 years, really 11, 12 years, really connected to some of my theory that I received in college. And basically gave us an ability to actually know whether or not the organization was organizational change and implementation was the best it could be.
Who were some of the major influences in the theory at that time about organizational development and change that most influenced you?
Well, one was Wes Kavarston, who at that time was the COG director, who, much like Jack Dabalski, was an institution at the Council of Governments that would, when I got my first promotion from one job assignment to another, wrote me a note, something to the effect that you've accomplished great things, and obviously this sets the standard for the future. Basically saying you haven't risen to your full potential, you've got more to do, and you can be successful that way. Another was one of the former police officers who was my immediate supervisor by the name of Billy Wasson, who left the police department as a sergeant, came to work as the lead planner, and helped me understand how to allocate work and how to manage my workload and how to write succinct reports, because police officers do a good job of that, and to be not only succinct but concise and totally have all the facts, have all the information, which enabled us oftentimes to get some of the best grant awards, even though we were a fairly small community. And you're talking numbers in criminal justice of only like $300,000 or $400,000 a year in grant awards, but for our area, that was millions by comparison. And then there were other mentors that I can get into in a moment as I moved my career from Oregon to Arizona. That happened after 3 years of working with the Regional Automated Information Network, which by abbreviation is RAIN, which in the state of Oregon, rain is king. That's why it's so green there, and that's what I miss about Oregon, is that plus family. Oregon lives and dies on housing because it's all about timber. Timber, agriculture, and fisheries were the strongest elements of that industry. But it also then began to learn that it had to diversify, and that led to the Oregon area of having a lot of industry coming in, Honeywells, and mostly around the Portland area. So you begin to learn a little bit about people, or industry locates where people are that are very educated and that have the skill sets, and they also locate where there's good education, both in terms of college, but also in terms of your high school and elementary. And a third element of amenities. What are the kids going to do with their time that they're not in school? You know, sports, the arts and culture, other aspects like that. But given the economy of Oregon is always on a yo-yo, and we were always funded out of the timber receipts in our county and city governments, we were never getting very good salary increases or a certainty of salary. So by chance in 1983, July, leaving a wet state, bringing heavy jackets, etc., to Arizona to help a family, my friends moved back to Oregon. I found out that the weather was not exactly the same and the economy was much different. So I had to quickly dress down in terms of, couldn't wear my heavy jackets. Wool coats don't work very well in 100-degree weather. And be able to help my friends get ready to move north. And I was here for about 2 weeks. And during that period of time, I began to look at the newspaper and see if the grass was greener on the other side, meaning the private side as opposed to the public side of the ledger. Learned quickly that through a personnel manager who was a friend of the people I was staying with, that it is not necessarily, the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side of the fence, but the only way you're going to get there is with a 2-page resume instead of 6 pages of everything you ever did. So tailoring resumes and then looking around, shopping for a few jobs, just what-ifing. Happened to go into the Association of Counties based upon a job announcement up in Greenlee County. Found in conversations with the county association director that while I was in the building, why don't you go upstairs and talk to Jack Dabalski in the League of Cities and Towns. So went upstairs without an appointment or anything else. He just said, go upstairs and talk. Maybe the league has something. Didn't expect to see Jack or anybody particular, but the next thing I know, Jack walks in and he had a nice style to figure out whether or not you were even cut from a cloth that could even fit government. And part of it was, I've told Jack this several times, Jack had a way of actually cutting quickly to the point and said, I don't know you from Adam, what are you expecting from me? And you got dirt on your shoes, etc. And for whatever reason, after I explained why I was there, he stepped out for a little bit, came back in and said, call me in an hour and I'll see if maybe there's an opportunity for you. So I proceeded to leave, a little bit shaken, but I didn't say anything when Jack threw the rocks at me. And he proceeded to tell me an hour later that if you drive west on Indian School till you hit the palm trees, which was Litchfield Road, and turn south, you're going to run into a small place called the town of Goodyear. And there's a manager out there that is willing to talk to you, but he doesn't have an opening. But if you're willing to go out there and talk to him, who knows what will happen. So half hour later, it took me almost an hour to drive from the league office there on 19th, out Indian School Road, and got out there and introduced myself to Ernie Kleinschmidt. Ernie Kleinschmidt was the town manager, had been there, this is 1993, had been there since 1992, started out as a town clerk, became the manager. He worked with, now I go blank, Charlie Salem. Charlie Salem was the mayor for like 10 years, and Charlie spent a lot of his years as the league president of the league, or the head of the regional council for the MAG offices. in that period of time. So anyway, I visited with Ernie. He showed me this big map that was all empty territory. He says, we got a strip annexation, 56 square miles. We have annexed, incorporated 14 of those, but eventually we're going to grow, and this is what we're going to look like. And this freeway from Los Angeles that ends here at the Agua Fria River, Dicer Road, that you drove out, someday is going to be built into Phoenix. Well, that someday became 1992 before that ever happened. But he says, when that happens, then the West Valley is going to grow, and we want to be ready, and we want to be better than Scottsdale, and we want to have all the things that they have, but better than that. And I said, well, do you have an opening? And he said, well, I don't, but let me think about it. Call me back in a week. So I go back to Oregon. I call him back in a week. He says, yeah, I have this opportunity, but you'll have to fly back down and interview with the mayor. And I said, can you help me pay for the trip? He said, no, that's your nickel. So I came back down in September, and at the same time I had an interview I was a finalist in Greenlee County. And I said, what are you offering on this? And he said, well, I can offer $1,100 a month. So, Amanda, how much you make?
More than that.
Anyway, so I go out and visit. This is like Saturday or Friday, and Saturday's the interview up in Greenlee County. So I go out and visit with him, visit with the mayor, and I say, Ernie, I'll come to work for you, but we need to work on this cost. And he said, what do you think? And I said, give me another $100. I'm already taking a $10,000 pay cut in consideration to come down here. He said, okay. But it was all based upon what Goodyear could become, and it was a blank canvas with only 1.5 miles of 56 square miles actually having any development on it. And he said, we could be the best and the brightest, and we can do a lot of the things that no one else has done. Think outside the box. So he began to shape and always offer up opportunities for, why can't we do something? And in that period of time, the interesting thing I found was it was very much about handshakes were contracts. He also had a habit. I'd come to work, and there were 39 employees at the time. And the job assignments he gave me was assistant to the manager, the Parks and Rec director, and personnel. 3 months. I started work November 1st. In January 1, the town clerk left. January 1, I became the town clerk, in addition to these other assignments. And Ernie always had the habit of coming in about 15 minutes after I would come in. I'd come in at 8. He'd show up 15 minutes later, talk, and would sit down and talk about there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I would come at 7 o'clock in the morning. He'd show up at 15 minutes early or later and say, Stephen, there's something at the end of the tunnel. It's a light. I don't know if it's a train. I don't know if it's an opportunity. Let's go find out. He always had this knack of always saying that you never ask why, you always ask why not. Let's go find out. And he was always about, we need to partner. We need to find other people that are willing to participate in an issue, and let's go out there and chase it. And so he had that knack, and he had told me at the time I hired that in 5 years I plan to retire, and it's up to you as to whether or not you want the job and whether or not you can fill the bill. And it was really neat because in that 6-year period. It ended up 6 years instead of 5, so he didn't hold his promise there. But we had an opportunity where he said, you already know the soft side of the organization. You know budget, you know programming, you know personnel, and all these other things, but you don't know the technical side. You don't have a deep enough grounding in the development side of the house. You need to understand water, sewer, the lifeblood of the organization. If you don't have those, you're not going to grow. And you need to understand how we grow a community with jobs and things like that. So for that six-year period of time, I got to spend a lot of time with the development side. But he was shaping that based upon knowledge of what should be, even though from 1976, there was a 10-year period of time, they had not added a single house in the community. He knew what we needed to do and to advance forward. And he was largely responsible. He was one of the parties in the West Valley, along with Marvin Andrews from Phoenix, Stan Van Depew in Glendale. As managers, they creatively sat down one evening and they pulled together what became the boundaries of Phoenix, Goodyear, and Glendale to protect Luke, and to establish where we were going to have boundaries for future growth, and said, these are our jurisdictions and this is where we're going to grow to, and you get this part, I get this part, etc. And that was back in the 70s. That was the strip annexations that was the 10-foot wide strip that ran along streets that had to have some property attached to it so you could have value, and then you could annex a whole bunch of area with 1 or 2 signatures. That went away in about 1986 when the senator from Litchfield Park passed a bill that said no more strip annexations. You have to annex in full. You have to have 51% of the signatures on ownership and 51% of the land value. Because with one signature, we were bringing in huge tracts of land with higher values, as long as we had enough signatures for the values. But we could bring in large tracts. It didn't matter how many property owners. It just mattered in terms of assessed valuation for many, many years. So that began to set the stage for what was, in 1986, the project called Estrella Mountain Ranch, known also as Charlie Keating, that led to the development of what is a premier development of 20,000 acres in one fell swoop. We grew from 56 square miles to eventually 120 after several annexations. And development of water and sewer infrastructure north of the river to support south of the river, and the developer putting all the infrastructure in exchange for us being responsible for government and serving the people. Because Charlie had a vision of, I can build communities, but I don't want to govern them. I need a partner in that process. And that, again, a very successful relationship. The S&Ls, the saving and loan debacles of 1989, saw Charlie's property of 20,000 acres taken over by the Resolution Trust Corporation, RTC, who then I got my education in bureaucracy of the federal side, who did not want all the parties that we ever dealt with for about 3 years in that process never kept any records, because they did not want those records to be used against them as they advanced in their federal careers, which was an interesting perspective. But at one time, the Resolution Trust Corporation wanted to take the 20,000 acres and carve it up into chunks and sell it off. And that was one of the times that I learned how to bluff and just throw it out there. I went to the mayor and I said, look, they have all these people coming in to buy the property, and all the water's coming from north of the river. We've got 9,000 acres sitting there that has no water attached to it. So at the conference that RTC convened, I said, if the RTC divides all the property up, the town, at that time we became a city, the city of Goodyear will not serve water. You're out on your own. So it worked. It ended up being sold to one party, and the rest is history, but that's been sold 3 times, and every time that they've sold it, the next owner turns around and looks at coming up with a better land plan and ends up reusing 90% of what was the original plan. Very well. So I view a Charlie Keating as kind of one of those visionaries out there who was using everybody else's money, which then helped us understand what we needed to do to protect the town in terms of how to do development agreements. He helped us craft some good development agreements, but we then became better at making sure that infrastructure was there and the developer was going to pay, and that the development community was going to support the growth of the community and build the community, and then we had an ability to sustain the community in terms of its overall life. Because they're there to make a profit, we're there to help them be profitable, but we now need to maintain a profitable, sustainable community.
Excuse me, what were some of the models for how that has been successful elsewhere? Or unsuccessful, that made you suspicious and learn how to craft better development agreements?
Well, part of it was watching what other cities in the valley did in terms of Scottsdale as one that I think...
McCormick Ranch, or what kind of...
Yeah, the McCormick Ranch, what is now the DC Ranch. I mean, some of these are after those stages, but in terms of quality, those obviously stand there at the top of the list. In terms of some of the development elements, we were in a situation where we really didn't have any development going on until 1986 to, I'd say let's say 1990. And we could see what was going on in Phoenix, Scottsdale. Chandler was beginning to boom. Gilbert had a very nice project there with the lakes and all. Gilbert had, with their city manager, help me out, before George Pettit. I'll find it. I'll find it. But they crafted some good development agreements that required the developers to use improvement districts or to use some funding that they would get reimbursed through development fees for the cost of that infrastructure, but they're not going to get advanced. We're not going to pay cash for something that is your obligation. The next guy connecting, we're going to take money from him and pass that on to you. So those all helped. In future references, there was Chula Vista in California that had a model in terms of how to extend that out of the basic services of water and sewer and extend it to all services, including police and fire and a few other categories, which was helpful for some of the things that we were able to do during some of our negotiations. It wasn't until almost the year 2000 that we were able to find a way to get police and fire operational money from the development community, and that we did a project with Continental Homes along the freeway edge on 2,000 acres where they were going to put up monies not only for building facilities, but for the operational side for 5 years. Because as soon as a new fire station is required, you have to hire 18 to 20 people to man that facility to serve 24 hours a day. And that's $1.5 million instantly without retail revenues coming in to help shore that up. So we were able to get them to finance 5 years worth of O&M costs that then spread out over other developers. In terms of the Palm Valley development north of the freeway, that's 7,000 acres, 7,700 acres of Suncor property that we did the litigation on CFD's Community Facility District. They and their predecessor actually was Westinghouse. Were trying to take that land, which was cotton fields, which was all owned by Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. That phenomenal history of our growth as a community and our namesake. But they wanted to take the Community Facility District and put it out in the county. And therefore, they would not be subject to any city regulations. And with Jack Dabalski's help, et cetera, we were able to get the legislation to read that we would agree to Community Facility District as long as it was inside the city. And we've fought off several attempts to modify that and get it out into the counties ever since. The benefit of that was would take monies, the developer would put in infrastructure that would then be reimbursed by a community facility district that had been placed over all the land. So you formed the district first. You then set a dollar amount for future bonding, let's say $100 million, $300 million, aggregated for 7,000 acres was $300 million. We took that money, we took that authorization. The only voter in that instance was the property owner who happened to be the developer. So he somehow managed to get a unanimous vote. Those properties then could, once they established a 4-to-1 debt ratio, meaning they built the infrastructure, they built houses on them, et cetera, they could eventually get reimbursed whenever they wanted $1 million worth of reimbursement. They had to demonstrate that they had $4 million worth of taxable property for debt coverage purposes, and then they would get reimbursed out of that bond issue. And the CFDs essentially was a special district authorized by legislation. By the time I left in 2007, we had 13 operating community facility districts over a substantial portion of our community, which enabled us to have a lot of infrastructure put into ground, high quality development, with them recognizing that they were going to get money back faster than just through home sales. So it was another form of tax. And you always had to be concerned because a $3 tax rate per $100 of assessed valuation always began to push you on that edge of what would the community tolerate and how competitive would you be in the rest of the valley. So if the total tax rate in Tempe area was 12, how much farther above that could you be and still have homes sold in Ahwatukee always being where people wanted to go versus driving out to the Goodyear area where it might be 14 or 15. And if you went much higher than that, everybody, all the real estate brokers and everybody said, well, come over here. You got a more expensive house, but it's cheaper on the taxes. So the developers actually began to recognize that they had to balance whether or not they could charge, they could get any more than 3. And we as a town, as a city, the council became uncomfortable of giving them open-ended because some of them wanted 6 and 8. And after a while, we got policies put in place that became pretty much bulletproof. We're not even going to talk to you unless you unless you max out at 3 with a 30 cent for administrative charges.
So talk with us a little bit about how, as Goodyear is working through all these development issues, and how are you actually working with some of the other surrounding communities in the West Valley? And
Okay.
Getting back to what you said originally about the values of the police chief who knew, don't take it all but spread it around.
Mm-hmm.
There's this tremendous boom going on in the West Valley, and I assume the cities are competing to a certain extent for these developer agreements.
Mm-hmm.
So talk with us about that. Goodyear versus and/or working with the wider West Valley.
That was the ability to have partnerships with local government, county, was necessitated in part because we didn't have any money to do it ourselves, or we wouldn't collect enough. It would take us 10 years to do programs. So we had a variety of different approaches that we built with the county, with other cities, and even school districts. And one of the things, let me focus on the school element first of all. In 1989, as I became manager, at the same time, 2 other people came on board in their respective organizations. One was Tom Heck with the school district of Litchfield Park, or Litchfield Elementary School District, and another was John Durbin at Agua Fria High School. And we invited them and Avondale Elementary School District, which was also in our city limits, Buckeye Elementary School District, and Buckeye High School. We invited each of those superintendents to come together and talk about how are they going to get ready for development. Not a problem. The developers will just give us a piece of land and we're all set. We said, what do you know about land planning? Who is your land planner? And I held up a mirror for them to say, oh, we are, So what do you know about it? And what are the mechanics of it? And who's going to be successful in this tug of war? And will they give you a good piece of property? And will they give you a big enough piece of property? That led to, from our community, and then we had, they said, well, there are other players that need to be here, so we added Estrella Mountain Community College. And then they say, well, there's other cities and towns that our school district overlaps into. So that brought in Avondale. And then it brought in Tolleson. And then it brought in Buckeye. And so we ended up with this larger consortium, and for about 3 years, in monthly conversations that I would have with them, we talked about what it was going to take, and we need to have a formalized relationship. And this is 89 to 92 when the economy just went in the tank because there was no money, because the S&Ls had wiped out everybody's ability and real estate wasn't worth anything. We got them to understand, and then they said, well, where's the developers? And that was who we had originally said, bring the developers in. No, we're not ready for them. We need to understand what we're going to do first. During the course of that period, from 1989 to 1996, we worked together with the various school districts, the development community, and the towns and cities. And we created what we called the City School Developer Partnership. November 1996, we actually had a document that we had 13 signatories from those various entities sign. And there were more than that, but only 13 signed. At Estrella Mountain Community College, we had a big event. And it was a document that essentially said, developers, you all agree that you are willing to donate land to the schools in exchange for, and you will also provide money to the school for O&M, because property taxes will not occur until 18 to 24 months after the demand for the school exists. because there's kids, new kids, and you have overcrowding already. And the town and cities would give up their individual parks and co-locate part of that land with the school, instead of having a school site of 15 acres and a 10-acre park sitting over here across the street. Put them together and you have a 15 to 20-acre parcel, and you'd have greater use of it in exchange for schools opening up their doors to use of their space, the gymnasium, the ball fields, etc., to the towns and the cities. So this cooperative arrangement provided an opportunity for the developer to see that they weren't going to be asked for every nickel and dime out of their pocket for public services, that schools would share, cities and towns would share in the cost of that service, and we would have everybody a winner. The high schools, or the grade schools, got $700 per house built in that district. The high school got $300, so there was $1,000, and then over time it should grow. Part of this was all based upon us finding a consultant to help the schools identify what their build-out conditions were going to be. School developer partnership became a compact, which was a pledge by all the development community that they would pay money into the schools, the $1,000 split between the elementary and the high school at $700 and $300, and that we would co-locate city facilities and land requirements like parks with the schools, so that we could reduce the amount of demand on land, because land has a value called housing for them, for the development community. It also encouraged the location of those schools to be at the center, so that more walking could occur, as opposed to having it at a street corner of arterials, which meant you had to bus more kids, which increased the O&M costs. And through that creative process, the schools, about 5 of them worked together, and we helped them create a school master plan, which became the advent for the school facility district, the state school facility district. We were getting donated land. We were getting monies. The state came in, changed the legislation with a little bit of developer help, where the developers got paid for the land, along with some of these other conditions. Those agreements still exist, and they still are being used in the various communities, very successful in some and less so in others. But what it did is leveled the playing field, where all the developers knew that every other landowner was going to be treated in the same fashion by the city, the town, and by the school districts. And from time to time they need to be tweaked to stay current with the demands. Because at this point, not only should we have parks located there, but we need a little bit more land so that we could actually put police and fire and building safety all at the same location, so that people could actually get some of their minor building permits, like a patio cover, at that location, versus driving all the way into town, which 15, 20 miles is time. In Buckeye, by coincidence, our northern end of our town is now 47 miles away. So we need to take the services to the community, as opposed to forcing everybody to be inconvenienced. And schools, quite frankly, have become what I call the town square for what you see in the East Coast, where everybody goes to the town square for music and gatherings, etc. Arizona, because it's so spread out and you have such large communities, you don't have that same ability. So schools have almost become the substitute for what used to be the courthouse or the town hall, with all the surrounding activities right there and everybody gathered there. Schools need to take on that same opportunity, so that more parents would actually engage with government, which is one of the things I see less and less of. it's inconvenient to get engaged. It's too difficult. It's not worth the time. I don't like the process, and that's a bothersome thing that we have to figure out a way to re-engage our community in. You are the government, and the council members are only your representatives, and staff is the agent for delivering those services you want to pay for. The operative word is pay for, which oftentimes give me the service without me paying for it. We have a balancing act there to work on.
Talk to us a little bit about, it's almost like this kind of Uber planning that you've talked about on this very, very large scale, because it's cotton fields, citrus fields, and farming communities, and upon which you're developing in a huge scale, and bringing in just phenomenal numbers of people, and building communities so quickly. What are some of the, how do you think beyond some of the just development arrangements to think about quality of life for the people who are coming in, and distinguishing between what Goodyear is from Avondale or Tolleson or Buckeye?
It's a very difficult situation in Arizona to deal with people that come from Chicago, other metropolitan areas, where they come in and expect exactly the same amenities that they always they were able just to go to a movie, go to a show, go to the opera. And Arizona doesn't have the history. I mean, it is still in infancy relative to Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and other places. And there's a balancing act and an educational issue that oftentimes management needs to take a greater role in, and oftentimes never gets a chance to because of tenure, the ability to stay in one place for a long period of time. Even though Arizona is blessed with some of the longest tenured managers in the United States. Anywhere from 2 to 6 years is a lifer in a lot of communities in other states, and for Arizona to have people in place for 10, 15, 20, and in some instances some people that manage roughly 30 years, such as Joel Valdez down in Tucson. Time and space, and whether they were in the development throes at that time or not, sometimes affects the cycle that a manager has. The influx of new people who have different expectations, who do not value all the history of your community, nor do they value all the pain and agony and all the efforts that everybody else paid for. And you're walking in with a presumption that you have a right to everything without paying anything. And how to balance those expectations. You constantly have to go back and revisit and educate and inform people, and you have to engage those people about what government is and what it's intended to do, and how is it financed. Because government is not financed in Arizona the way it's financed on the East Coast. Property taxes are very low here relative to a lot of other places. Most places don't have the luxury of a huge sales tax that we live on, but we also die on it. Because if retail is not growing, if your population is not growing, you're not going to get a bigger cut of the state shared revenues. And if you don't get a bigger cut, then you have a declining revenue stream there, and you have to build more retail in your community in order to take care of the demands for service. Like I described earlier, a fire station, one company in a fire station, the station is going to cost you anywhere from $3 to $5 million with a truck in it. Your personnel, one shift, 24/7 is $1.5 million, but you build those so that you can have 3 companies in it, so that's $5 million worth of staffing, plus $1.5 million in trucks. that becomes a challenge when the national statistics will show you that a super Walmart generates about $1.5 million. So how many super Walmarts does Phoenix need in order to support 60 fire stations? It has 20 Walmarts. It didn't make it to 60. So you have to find other resources to take care of that. And even the nature of the demand for service has gotten so good that construction is better, that people are more careful, that people don't have as much stuff laying around that catches fires. Electrical codes are better. So we have a lower incident of fire. The problem is we're still running a fire model that no longer applies when 90% of all the calls are emergency medical service. But we still run big trucks to a medical call. So we need to change our fire focus on how we deliver service. And this is one of the most volatile issues and most difficult because most of your people aren't around long enough to develop a relationship with the unions, the associations, who are the ones that are politically involved with your council members who, if you upset the union, you can upset council who says, why don't you leave? You're bothersome. You're raising all these issues. We know you're right, but we got all these other people that have stirred up our constituents, which is the other citizens. And therefore, manager, it's time to leave. You have a similar issue when it comes to police services, but in a different vein, because a lot of that is the lack of shared information. Fire has done a great job in terms of computer dispatching. There's a master dispatch center in Phoenix that's serving about 20 different fire services in the county. Thus, you don't have multiple dispatch centers and the cost of equipment and staffing. Police departments are still in the older fashion. When I came to the Valley, 911 did not exist in Arizona. We had it for like 10 years in Oregon. And so in a lot of ways, it just represents more of that infancy, that it had a long ways to go. In other areas, it shined. Services are extremely expensive. You have to have a lot of retail to support that. Retail doesn't come until you have a lot of houses. And the houses demand resource services, police and fire, long before you can afford them. So everything's kind of backwards. You need to have the jobs to support the houses, but the jobs aren't going to come, the new industry is not going to come until such time as there's a lot of houses, meaning labor. And a lot of those will not come unless you have a very educated labor force. So where is that school? Where's that institution? And now I think there's a challenge because of the cost of gasoline and other things. People are not willing to drive as far as they were willing to drive 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So areas have to find different things to cause people to want to live in your community. It's got to be education, it's got to be the amenities, and the amenities can't be here until you have a huge housing market that wants to go to an opera every weekend. Well, how many opera houses can you support in the Valley? I don't know that we've actually supported one. You can have a ASU Gamage, but it's having trouble filling its house, and then everybody else, like Mesa, is trying to have its cultural center full. Goodyear is in a process of trying to do the same thing. The developer wanted Goodyear to subsidize, and that's basically what ends up happening is government ends up subsidizing cultural centers. But without the cultural center, certain people won't live in your community because they will not commute that far for that.
What was an example of a developer wanting the Goodyear to subsidize the cultural center?
There was an individual who came in that said, look, I'll build this building, but you need to give me the land, you need to give me the infrastructure, and I'll let you use 50% of the space, but I need to set all the dates so that I can have enough people coming in. And so in a backward way, they were going to control everything, and the town was going to pay 100% of the cost. It didn't work. Mathematically, it didn't work, and that person's still running around with the idea in other communities trying to get the same idea to go, and no one's biting that hook. Municipal buildings are very expensive. Is it worth doing LEED certified when it adds maybe 10 or 15% cost to your overall building space? It's great in theory, something you want to do, but at what point do you stop that, and at what point is that money could have been used for other things, not just the building that you're in? Coincidentally, this building that we're in here today has the ability to put solar panels on top of the roof, but it's only 5,000 square feet, which is not big enough to generate enough power solely for this building. You know, it can't support it by itself, so you need other sources to support that. But things have changed over time. We've moved from the handshake to this more formal relationship. We've moved to a litigious society that everything is litigated. It doesn't matter what the promise is. We need to reconsider that. It's a financial issue, etc. And the more time you spend on negotiations means the less time you're delivering service, so that means you have to have more staff. Government cannot operate like a business until you give up the stockholders, which I call the community, having the board only show up annually to make decisions and allow the CEO to run the organization. That's not the way we're organized, but everybody says government should run like a business. Now, certain aspects of it you can't. But until democracy is taken away from government, it won't happen. And I think those are some of the truisms you begin to learn as it's a phrase, but we want to make sure that we are not the last resort for employees. It used to be said that if you can't work in private sector, go work for government. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the government has a huge number of people that are just as professional and can work in the private sector, public sector, and it's all about what is their primary interest. Is it about profit, or is it about giving back to the community, the public service side of that house? And that's a challenge, and what you have to do is you find the best and the brightest that want to come to work and make a career out of it. In Goodyear, we were able to have people come to work and continue to work there even longer than I did. So
how did you talk with us about how you developed values for your staff, and how you hired and how you trained? Because I'm assuming a lot of the things that you talked about in the beginning of our discussion come back into play when you become the city manager.
I find that hiring people, you first need to determine if their values are the same as yours. Meaning they believe in the community first, they believe in teamwork, they believe in sharing resources, because there's never enough resources when you're growing. That those values need more, especially in department head levels and above, have empathy, but also can discipline employees when they need to. Can they make decisions? Do they know how to make decisions? They may have a great title from another job, but they may not have any of the skill sets. So you assume in part that they have technical skills, but do they have the soft side skills, and do they have, most importantly, communication skills? Because if they can't speak, then you have a lot of problems, because 90% of your work is communications.
So how did that change from the time that you met first Jack Dabalski and then Ernie, and they were able probably within an hour to decide that they were going to take a chance with you?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the process that you went through as city manager in terms of what the hiring procedures were, so that you could get to those values that you couldn't get to in an hour anymore.
Yeah, my experience with Jack and Ernie was without having to go through a formal application, without having to compete with others. And it was based on gut instinct, and it was based upon them, in some sense, asking me questions that you could not even legally ask today. And to be able to challenge you and confront you in a negative fashion, to see if you had the ability, the smarts to keep your mouth shut, or were you a hothead and would blow up. Because in the political world, that says a lot about whether or not a person is going to be successful in the role. All the affirmative action rules and regulations that have come into play have actually constrained more and more people's ability to really find the best and the brightest people, because you kind of dance around the edges of issues, and you're not able to address those head on, for fear that once you hire them, you end up in a lawsuit potential, equal employment opportunity. I had a situation once where a director came in proudly telling me that in his previous job he had not lost an equal employment opportunity case. And he told me about 3 of them, and I said politely, well, as long as you're employed with me, we will not have a case. We will not create that case. And you will take 18 months to make book to demonstrate that the individual you say should be fired can be fired. You got to document that this person can't deliver the goods. And those were in some of those early years as we went. I had 68 employees when I first took the manager role. We grew to 550. And in 1993, we found that we needed to create a culture, because we were going to be potentially 3,000 employees. And what is that culture that's going to sustain the organization, keep us on the same focus? So we use customer service quality improvement program as a concept, a direction, a set of principles that was value laden, and it spoke to, we have to work as a team, that we're going to continuously look for ways to improve our business processes, and that we are going to recruit differently, and we are going to have training programs. And the part of that process of recruitment and orientation training, in most organizations you speak to, they're lucky to have a 6-hour orientation. We had a 6-day orientation. It really started out 3 weeks, and then we pared it down because of redundancy. And involving all the directors and different parts in it to demonstrate by our actions, these are the organizational values. I spent 3 hours in my orientation class, first day, talking about our value systems, our strategic vision, goals and directions that we were having, and to talk about and get to know each of the employees. By the time that 3 hours was over, I knew something about each employee, and I had called on them often enough that I knew them by name, if I ran into them 3 weeks later, I could at least relate to where they came from, why they came here, or something about their family. And that oftentimes became a reason for those people who left the organization because of other financial considerations, a family situation that necessitated moving back to take care of the folks or whatever, that they came back to the organization when they had an opportunity, and they went back through the orientation, and I had them explain why they came back. And it was about the culture. We had a culture that valued them and allowed them to be a participant in the decisions to find a better way of to deliver water, to install meters, or to upgrade technology, or to work as a team on a business process that involved multiple departments that oftentimes in the past would be one department sending out an edict and everybody else saying, wait a minute, that we don't operate that way. And we actually re-engineered our entire development services process. It took us 18 months. But it also took me being present in those meetings, demonstrating that if it's worth my time, it's worth your time to be there to help simplify the way we did business and get down to the basics of what's the first thing you do when the phone rings. They said, start talking. I said, no, you don't. You got to put a box there that says, pick up the telephone. To get people to think differently about what are they doing in their business, in that job, and how important it was that you teach a person to answer the phone, to help a person know whether or not they're in the city limits by learning how to read a map. And say, no, you don't. Here's a county phone number. Or yes, you do. You don't today, but here's the annexation process. Versus the planner will call you, and oftentimes that was 2 and 3 days later, to say, no, you don't, you're not in the city limits. And this person being a little bit mad about the waste of time in between. And so taking full responsibility, and we use the concept of the moment of truth, which is when somebody walks up to you, at that very moment, you as a staffer are the city of Goodyear. You represent it, and you need to at least know what department to direct that person to, and then you actually take them there. And you actually have a conversation. You might end up with a friend when you get finished with the conversation, because you exceeded their expectations. They never expected you to take the time to get up from your desk and walk down the hallway to take them to the department they needed to be in. They always believed as, you're in my face, get out of here, you're interrupting my quiet time. We had to change that culture. We had to change the way we did business. And we had to sustain it, and we would have every year what I call Employee Summit. And we would do fun things around Survivor Island or Indiana Jones or superheroes, and everybody would dress up, and I would always come out in some costume. And what you see here today is my typical dress, and nobody could believe that I would dress up in an astronaut's outfit for 5 or 6 hours, or dress up as Indiana Jones with snakes hanging on me and stuff like that, or the Mummy. But you had to create something that was connecting back to the employees, and then have the employees participate. So it was not the ivory tower. It is, you are part of the organization. And a lot of times people never get a chance to actually get to know their employees. But the employees are the ones that deliver the service, and they're the ones that make or break the organization. They're the ones that are going to enable somebody to say it's worth paying property tax. It's worth buying locally versus driving to Arrowhead to get something. Well, can you get it at Lowe's here? Can you get it at Walmart here? Because that's money that comes back into the community to support the cost of service. And so you end up spending a little bit of time educating your employees about economics. What is it that the organization needs in order to survive, and why it is it's important that you provide excellent service so that they're willing to pay higher water rates, higher garbage service delivery rates. or to go to a recycling system, etc. And enable them to be the spokespeople, as opposed to it's always got to be the person at the top because I'm afraid of what that employee is going to say. Well, that's our fault. We need to educate them and inform them and make them train them to the point that they someday are going to be in my seat. So the concept of succession planning, how do you give them an opportunity to replace you? Partly by shadowing, partly by mentoring, partly by cross-training and having conversations department to department, and even going inside the department, sitting and watching them go through the exercise. Having the fire department give everybody CPR on the third day that they've been employed, and handing them their certificate. You're good for 2 years. You'll have to redo it later, but so we were all CPR certified. What is your style versus my style? And I may be talking one language and you're not picking up on it. I need to understand you. There's 4 or 5 different ways that people operate. And some are hustlers and type A's, and others are social oriented, and others just follow the book. And how do you blend those together in a good team? You never put 4 social people together and expect them to come out with a report project. You mix it up, but they'll be great at organizing a party if that's what you want, you know. So how to mix those blends together, and that's part of, I think, the new challenge of management is us understanding the bigger picture, and you almost have to become psychologists. And I think that you need to take classes in those areas that we traditionally would not have taken, because it is not about staying between the lines. It is about getting out of the gray area and risk-taking, taking that chance. And the Jack Dvorsky's and the Ernie Kleinschmidts and those individuals were always there offering up, sure, we can do that, and helping you find a way to do that. And I'll pause.
How did ACMA function for you in terms of giving you the ability to know, of course, all the other city managers, but also to learn from their experiences?
ACMA is a fantastic organization. It gives you an opportunity to not only go to conferences twice a year. The winter conference typically now is in Sedona, and summer conference down in Tucson. And during those times, different program focuses that have evolved over time. And it's as much of the networking and the interaction that you have with other managers to find out that you're not the only one having that kind of problem, and here's some possible solutions based upon their experiences. Have you ever tried this? Call so-and-so, they've just gone through that experience, and get some insight from them. And information exchange. And then the managers have gone a step further, which is to have managers actually sit on panels where they can share information back. And how do we share that information to the future managers in terms of all supervisors and future supervisors coming to the programs and trying to expand the network so that people can see this side of the house. It isn't just fun and jollies when you go to those meetings. A lot of times you're still working. But there is a point in that process where you can talk about things you could never talk about in your community. You can't even talk to your staff. You find ways where they can tell you you're all wet. You know, you're just hung up about something that is not material. But you can't do that inside your organization because you might get mad at them or whatever. But you can with somebody that is not vested in you. so they can be a nice reality check. And likewise, you for them.
And how about ICMA? How did that have an impact on your career?
Okay. Well, let me say one more thing about ACMA, was that I never never went through the ranks in terms of, being in the leadership role of the organization on that side. But at one point, George Flores, who we both know, invited me to help out figure where the organization was in the early 90s, or during the 90s, on how to finance the organization. And so I was made the finance subcommittee, and ultimately became a finance committee and a standing representative to help them out in that process of redefining. We were losing money, are we going to continue to lose money, how to change that organization. So with some other members of the profession, we were able to get ourselves on a better position, establish our financial growth in terms of dues and what was the fee structure, or the cost of Botana Canyon or Sedona, setting up 5-year contracts as opposed to year-to-year contracts, where should we renew them, that type of thing. So, and then participated in what was called Pracademics, which was the partnership between ASU and ACMA in terms of how do we combine our profession into the academic side of education with both high school level students and with a little bit of the ASU into the profession, so that we could give back. And I think that helped lead to such things as Marty Vanacor's classes and Lloyd Harrell and some of the other people that I from time to time look to and say, guys, give me a hint. You worked in a bigger community. What are some of the issues that you ran into? And some of them we ran into in small communities that they had never experienced. So people like Dick Bowers and Marty Vanacor, Lloyd Harrell, Mike Letcher are some of those that I continue to network with. And then I call Mark Pence occasionally to figure out, okay, so how do you manage to survive the unions in Chandler? So that is where ACMA has been so valuable, because you create, it's who you know, and it's a relationship building that enables you to have conversations about the work that you need to get done. You don't go and start negotiating a deal until you really have have a respectful relationship with the other person. Developers, you need to know something about their kids. You need to know something about do they like sports or something else, and have that kind of conversation before you actually get inside of trying to negotiate a deal. You need to know what causes them to tick, so that you can negotiate the best deal.
How about when you made that transition from assistant and then you became the city manager? How did you make that transition? What about that surprised you?
The biggest surprise of transitioning from assistant manager into the management role was the difficulty of letting go of the technical, the hands-on project work, and spending more and more time with the council relationships and the developer relationships, and then this broader role of being the champion for all the culture. And that meant that I had to change part of my style, which I tend to be more type A, and learning how to encourage the heart and to enable people to get work done through others. So letting go would be the first element of that. And trusting others that I had helped hire, that they were going to be the subject expert that could stand up there and I could keep my mouth shut long enough for them to be successful, and to then serve more as a a reflection of or train them on what would you do differently next time? How did it go well? What did you learn from it? What would you do differently next time? Versus telling them what they should do next time. Because it's all too easy for us to give the answer. It's more arduous to take the time to give people the ability to fail, and through failure learn. And to me, if you're not taking a risk, you have no chance to fail, and if you're not taking a risk, you have no chance to learn. So giving people that ability. Doing the same thing with town councils, city councils, in having them understand what the picture is and have them trust that the professionals are truly there to enable their agendas to be accomplished. And to integrate 7 different agendas into one that is a master approach for what their vision is as an organization, where they want to be, and how we can help them get there, became part of that challenge. Because they have a 4-year life cycle, and then they're up for an election. So getting them to understand that building buildings is not the monument that some of them will ever get to see. That building the foundations of great planning and good community relations and neighborhoods working together, such as the GAIN program, getting Arizona's to work together in neighborhoods. Those kind of initiatives where you're bringing these spread out communities into one activity so they have a sense of Goodyear as a community, as opposed to I'm in Estrella, I'm in Palm Valley, I'm in Pebble Creek, and we don't touch each other, versus we're all part of the same fabric of a community that will have infill, and at that time we will be a population of 100,000 people, 500,000 people, whatever that number is, and we'll grow there. And engaging all those people in the committee processes that are necessary for them to ultimately become future elected officials. So how do you start people in these small working groups, informal settings, and then get them on a transportation planning committee, a water resource planning committee, getting them into the planning and zoning commission, and then having them run for an election? How do you get these same people to work through and become party through the Citizens Academy, which we did with Avondale, Tolleson, Buckeye, Litchfield Park, with Estrella Mountain Ranch as the host, and we trained people year after year on what is local government and how does it fit. And a lot of the times that inspired these people to become future candidates for an election, or getting involved just in committees to get them there. To get the council and staff to participate in a broader leadership program, which I and about 8 other people had the pleasure of putting together 17 years ago, called Leadership West. And we had individuals such as Diane McCarthy and Homero Lopez from Estrella Mountain Community College, and a couple council members and other people, Marcy Ellis from West Valley Fine Arts Council. A number of us got together and we said we can replicate and make better a leadership program in the West Valley similar to Valley Leadership and other organizations in the Valley and state. And we'll put on 9 months of program, and we will teach our own, because this is 17 years ago, so it's about the year 2000. We are just beginning to grow, and we have a big vacuum called leadership. And we need to fill that in with future leaders, with 350 alumni now through that program. And I'm proud to say that in Goodyear, half of the council members went through the program, and almost all of the directors went through the program. So that annually we were plugging 1 and 2 people into that program to get them to understand this bigger picture, that air quality, transportation, water resources, environment, the social service programs, all of them have connectivity, and they're all part of the fabric of what we call community. And without all those if you don't understand all those pieces, then the community will not be successful. And those help lead to such things as the New Life Center being located in Goodyear for domestic violence, helping the Boys and Girls Club. We had council members, a mayor and a council member, that pushed creation of Boys and Girls Club. The argument between Avondale and Goodyear was, well, we're not going to support it if it's not in Avondale. Our mayor and council member said, fine, where in Avondale do you want it? You know, and having that understanding that it doesn't need to be in your own community to have success in a broader community, which is all your neighboring communities working together. So it is all of those working things of relations generate future opportunities. With county, we got bridges built, we've got water lines built, we got flood control structures. If you ever get a chance, drive the Cotton Lane Bridge and look at it and look at the side walls of the bridge. You'll see bats and Gila monsters and other creatures on it, symbolic of, you know, the Rio, El Rio, which is a master planning that was done with four cities and the county. All those things collectively, with the monies that we had, enabled us to do what we would never have been able to do by ourselves. And the county would we'll pay this money if you take these 4 roads, okay? So we got to surface our roads, we got to take that money and combine it with developer money to build a better road. Always thinking steps out beyond for how many times can you multiply the value of that money? And the more we could, better off we were as an organization. Then that led to our ability to demonstrate that we were the place to be for education, chasing the private institutions of Franklin Pierce and the University of Incarnate Word, to co-locate them with our City Hall site, to chase the Cincinnati Reds and the Cleveland Indians, so that we had a spring training facility, because those all have an impact in the greater picture of what a community can be. And those begin to set yourself apart from your neighbors, because not everybody can have a stadium, not everybody can have certain things, but these are things that you can have that are unique. And therefore now you can have car shows at the sports facilities. You never had venues before, but part of that cost was borne by the private sector along with the public sector in that effort.
What went into the decisions to attract, like, the cancer center?
The Cancer Center was a project of our economic development staff, and I'm proud to say that they did a wonderful job, and we took a tour to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to view their facility down there. They were looking for a Western regional facility. They always want to be 300 miles away from 80% of the population, so they could reach into California as a part of that. And the cost of California is a little higher than Arizona. And we got into competition with City of Phoenix. The difference was that we had what they call GPLET, GPLET funding that Phoenix has, but they only have it in downtown Phoenix, and you can only do one per area, which is basically the city owns the land for a period of time. They lease the land and build their building on it. So at the end of the day, we were in the top 3 with Gilbert, ourselves, and Phoenix, And then it was narrowed to Phoenix and us because they wanted to be near a freeway and they wanted access to California. And then ultimately it was the financing that made the difference. But again, it went back to relation building. So we had some fun in that regard.
I think we're getting the signal.
Yeah,
on
I
the
got
top.
yes.
Still have a little?
Yes.
I do. I gotta get going too.
Okay. Most of what's in here. Okay.
Well, I'm happy to do another couple hours with
Okay,
you.
we'll do it. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go
Yeah,
back.
okay.
I can't let the interview conclude without noticing the pen that you have on.
Oh,
So
yes.
You've got to talk to the issue of Luke a little bit.
Absolutely. Luke Air Force Base is a premier training center in the world for F-16s now, and is in the finals for the F-35. This is the F-35 model. That has huge implications to the Arizona economy, to the tune of about $2 billion a year. And it is the only government that hasn't shrunk. Well, it has in some ways, but it is the only government, or it's the only industry that tends to be stable even in recession. It's kind of recessionary proof in that sense. I'm part of an organization called Fighter Country Partnership, which has previously been called the Talons and some other names. It is a community-based support group for Luke Air Force Base. And Fighter Country Partnership is intended to be the business side of the house and the governmental side of the house, primarily the business side of the house. And I've kind of been the governmental liaison for many, many years, since early 90s, to aid in what you guys are trying to do. Here is how the government's going to respond to that. And so it's been a good marriage, helping them understand what it's going to take to get government to be supportive of some of those initiatives. And I'm currently on sabbatical and I helped write the bylaws that said that an elected official or the appointed official of electeds cannot serve on the board of directors. But we stay active in it, and as you probably saw recently, there was the governor's press conference with the West Valley 13 communities to state that we're together on making sure that Luke is the place for the F-35, and the F-35 is a future generation that's probably going to be the next 20 to 30 years worth of airplane training in the United States, it being probably one of two facilities. And it's really important that we sustain that, and we sustain the 8,000 employees that work at Luke, which we can do, but we have to work on it. And we have occasional hiccups, like the El Morais story,
Right.
that we have to work around to help them find alternative solutions and be more supportive. I'd like to touch on, when we get back to, how do you facilitate council effectiveness?
Yeah.
I mean, we came up with some tools,
Yeah.
such as guidelines and communication guidelines that they actually created them. We helped facilitate that, and so I've been able to borrow that.
Gee, can we have those over in